4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right.
Day 12 of the Diddy case happened today. Prosecutors obviously still are calling various witnesses. Today they called somebody that, based on the comments we've seen come through on our YouTube channel and our podcast, through our podcast, maybe the most important witness of the trial, a woman by the name of Dawn Hughes. She's a psychologist, and she is here. She took the stand to answer the question, why would Cassie stay? Our comments have been full of people who say, if I was in her position, I just would have left. She always had the opportunity to leave, and clearly she did, right? Diddy wasn't holding her by gunpoint, as far as we know. Maybe there is some evidence to come, but wasn't holding her. She could have left. She could have gone to police. She could have done a lot of things, and she opted not to. Dawn Hughes was called to the stand by prosecutors to testify why it is that women in these kinds of situations often don't leave. We've heard about this a million times, right? Battered women syndrome is a very, very common thing.
That's right. And so just to take one quick step back, the witnesses we've heard to this point are what's called percipient witnesses. And that's a fancy term for witnesses who actually saw Diddy do things, interacted with Diddy. These are eyewitnesses. Fact witnesses. They're people who can testify to the things Diddy allegedly did that he's charged with. Now we've shifted to an expert witness. And you've heard this term before. Dawn Hughes is an expert witness. She's someone who doesn't know Diddy at all. She is just very learned in a particular subject matter that may bear relevance in this case.
And as even more, in this case, she's what's called a blind expert. She has been completely shielded from any testimony in this case.
That's right. And that's key. So she is, the temptation might be for an expert witness to tailor their testimony in such a way that it maps onto the prosecution's case. But you don't want that. That would be biased testimony. So what you have instead is an expert who says, I didn't listen to Cassie's testimony. I have no idea what she said or what her relationship was like. Those 4 days of testimony, I am blind to. I don't know about them. Here's what I know as an expert about abuse victims in general and their behavior. And then she's going to testify, and she did testify very, I think, credibly. She's been a witness in other big cases, Johnny Depp, R. Kelly, Harvey Weinstein. She said abusive relationships often cause behavior for the victims of abuse to stay in relationships past the time when it is a risk to their safety. And so what she's doing is laying out, this is how they behave. And the jurors are left, can we map on Cassie's behavior, which not leaving the relationship for 11 years, maps onto this behavior? And I think she did an effective job of that.
She did. I mean, she's a very professional witness, and I mean that in every possible way. This is what she does for a living. She testifies on behalf exclusively of a alleged domestic violence victim. She never testifies on the other side, something that the defense on the cross brought out, that she's never testified on behalf of somebody who has been accused of sexual misconduct. But she testified that it is common for victims to stay in abusive relationships, that many victims will wait months, even years, before telling anyone what happened to them, and that she labeled a trauma bond can make a victim unwilling to leave, among other information about intimate partner violence. And this is, again, we see this in domestic violence cases all the time.
That's right. And she also said these trauma bonds are so strong that sometimes the victims will defend their captors, or so to speak. So you can see some of Cassie's behavior. There was testimony that she would threaten other people who had witnessed things. There was testimony, there was an audio tape that was played that she may have gotten into a verbal altercation and made some threats towards someone who said, I'm going to leak some of this information about your sex tapes with Diddy and how freaky you guys are. Dawn Hughes' testimony now makes sense of that, at least if the jurors are willing to buy this science. Now, one thing Diddy's defense counsel did was challenge her credentials. This is the type of science that is not hard medicine. This is not DNA and lab coats and test tubes and beakers.
It's not based on scientific research. It's based on
studies.
The opinions of a psychologist and psychiatric community more generally.
That's right. This is clinical psychology, clinical psychiatry. So it's a little bit looser in some people's minds. And so the defense wanted to make sure to challenge some of her credentials as, kind of junk science. This is very, very common way of attacking someone. The other thing they did, defense counsel said, how many times did you meet with the prosecutors in preparing for your testimony? Now, she is allowed as an expert witness. She has to be told, what do you want me to testify to? I'm a clinical psychologist, but I know a lot of different areas. What do you need?
And by the way, they're not a privileged communication.
That's
Obviously,
right.
the Cassie could not be asked about her communication with her counsel, but the prosecutors they don't have clients. This expert witness is not a client. She has to testify fully about every detail of her conversations with the prosecutor.
That's right, because they're trying to ensure that she is truly a blind witness. What did you talk about during these? I think she said that she met with them 6 times, and that's going to land.
Including the day of her testimony, including this morning prior to going to court, she talked to them again.
That's right. And so what defense is trying to show the jury is this person met with prosecutors 6 times, including after Cassie's testimony. So they want to plant the seed that she's aware of what she needs to deliver in terms of expert testimony that maps onto the prosecutor's case in terms of how Cassie testified. So I thought they were pretty effective in those challenges, because even if they didn't get her to admit, like, I did hear Cassie's testimony, the jurors are going to have some feelings about her meeting after that.
Yeah. So Assistant U.S. Attorney Mitzi Steiner confirmed to the court that Hughes has been retained as an expert witness by one of Combs' defense attorneys in another case. And so I think that was an effort to kind of like, hey, you may claim this person's just in the prosecutor's pocket. Actually, his own defense attorney has hired this woman before in another case.
Yeah, so don't call her junk science. If she's junk science, good enough for the goose, good for the gander.
Right, exactly. And so that was an interesting point that was brought out. But this is sort of a bit of a pissing contest, right?
Yes.
About who can, she's testifying that many domestic abuse victims, I don't know specifically about this victim, but many of them cannot leave abusive relationships. So don't look at them and try and cast blame at them. The defense, during their case in chief,
they're going to have
the opportunity to call their own expert witnesses to say, in looking at and they may be more directive at Cassie's testimony, that say nobody's going to say that it's not true at all that abuse victims won't stay with their captors sometimes.
Right.
We all know that's true. But they're going to say Cassie, in this case, could have left at any time, and she does not have the hallmarks, the indicia of an abuse victim who would otherwise stay in an abusive relationship.
I think you're right. And a lot of times these criminal cases will devolve sort of into a battle of experts. And this will end up being just noise to a lot of jurors. Who's to believe? They have a scientist who says this. They have a psychologist who says this. A lot of times it's a bit of a wash. Don Hughes is impressive, but, mark my word, Diddy's going to have impressively credentialed expert witnesses during his presentation of the defense's side.
A really good witness, expert witness, can cost upwards of $1,500 to $2,000 an hour. The prosecution has resources at their disposal, but don't compare it to what Diddy's resources are. So, again, to your point, they're going to be matched step by step by the defense witness.
In your experience, look, you and I are not criminal attorneys. Do experts ever carry the day? I think mostly this type of case, in my opinion, is going to come down to, is Cassie a credible witness? Are all these former personal assistants credible? You do need some of this to sort of close the loop on how can I reconcile Cassie's behavior and staying in the relationship for 11 years, but they're not as critical as I saw Diddy ask me to take 3 guns to go meet Suge Knight.
Yeah, in civil cases they can be, which I tried civil cases, they can be very almost dispositive. But I think that the importance of the witness here is it's all teeing up closing arguments. We're going to have probably a full day and a half of closing arguments. And in that case, in the closings, what the prosecution is going to try to do is say, here are the elements of the crime. Here are each of the witnesses who have testified to the elements of the crime, and try and sew it up that way. And then, because Cassie's such an important witness, say, and you heard testimony from the experts who explain exactly why she didn't leave. She didn't leave because she was terrorized and traumatized for years by this man. And you heard these expert witnesses testify. That's why she didn't leave. So you need the prosecution in their closing to be able to rely on a witness to make that claim. And the defense similarly is going to say, yes, it's true that some victims don't leave, but you heard our expert witness say that wasn't the case here. So
Right.
Don't be fooled. Don't have the wool pulled over your eyes. That's not what happened here.
Yeah, and I want to make one more point before we leave this topic entirely. Cassie's testimony was explosive last week, and the sequencing of this is critical, right? They just still have all of that in their mind pretty fresh. The jurors remember her testimony. Then you bring in the expert to contextualize it, and then you get back to your case of bringing in the various gigolos and hired sex workers. You won't really need the experts on that type of
Right.
case. This is really all about Cassie and any victim testimony.
Speaking of sort of sex shaming, I guess, as it were, George Kaplan, if another former executive assistant to Diddy, called himself an executive assistant, also testified. Pretty redundant testimony to what we heard yesterday. He would come and set up the room prior to the freak-offs. He would then had the unfortunate task of cleaning up the room after the freak-offs.
Yeah.
Too much detail about what that entailed, except he removed a lot of Gatorade bottles and baby oil bottles.
He set things up. He said he also cleaned up the rooms afterward.
Yeah.
He said whenever we would spot something in the room that could be embarrassing to Mr. Combs, he said one time there was a brown residue in the sink. Who knows what it was? Maybe it was drugs. They would clean it up so that hotel workers didn't come in and snap photos and leak
We didn't
things.
want photos being leaked. This is, there's a little criticism over the last few days about how do these specific witnesses, why are they essential to proving any element of the case? That was especially true, I think, today with George Kaplan, because I don't think that any of his testimony was essential to the case. It all seemed pretty redundant. It seemed
Cumulative with the other assistant.
It seemed like, right, they were piling on kind of just to show that he was really freaky. They're obviously trying to, and as is their right, put it in the jury's head that this is a very strange guy capable of untold horrors.
Yes.
But I don't think that his testimony really went to that.
One interesting sideshow with George Kaplan was he came in initially and said he said, I'm going to plead the fifth. I don't want to testify in this case. I'm worried about self-incrimination. What happened was he, in court, signed...
Not in front of the jury.
Not in front of the jury, right. Not in front of the jury. Signed an immunity order. And the reason for that, just for people who are curious about why that transpired, once the judge signs an order that says you're immune from incriminating yourself, we're not gonna try you for anything that you testify about, it sort of takes away that Fifth Amendment right in a way, so that the judge can then say, now you've been subpoenaed, you no longer ever worry about self-incrimination. If you don't testify, I can hold you in contempt. There's actually a federal rule of evidence. If you don't testify, I'll cuff you and I'll send you to jail, because that's no longer a risk. An interesting side piece of how trials work like this.
Just before we get to comments, tomorrow, the first witness after George Kaplan, he didn't finish today. George Kaplan is going to testify in the morning. The next witness, according to prosecutors, Kid Cudi.
Kid Cudi, stay tuned.
All right. Go ahead.
All right, couple questions we've got from Enhanced Creators. Could this case be a lot shorter than 2 months at this pace? Great question. Why is this taking so long? I have one answer, and then I want to hear what Jason has to say. This is a case that needs to be built brick by brick. There's no smoking gun. They're not just trying to prove one murder. They're trying to prove that Diddy ran a criminal enterprise. Takes a lot of witnesses. You got to have a lot of former employees who are told to do misdeeds. And no one of them, and as Harvey has been arguing, this doesn't seem like racketeering because this can be explained away. He was just freaky. You need to build this by painting a picture, and that just takes time. You have a lot of witness testimony.
There's no way it's going to be too short. And if it is, it's going to be a day or two. It's not going to be a long period of time. As with all things in life, the amount of work and the amount of witnesses will expand to fit the allotted time. Here we have 2 months of allotted time. Lawyers love to hear themselves talk. They're going to talk. Also,
it's a complicated case.
It's a very complicated case. A lot of witnesses, expert witnesses in particular, take a long period of time, and juries need a lot of breaks because it's very dense testimony. You're also going to have court closed. You have court closed. Court is dark on Friday and again on Monday for the holiday. So it's not like you're going to have 2 straight months of testimony. You're going to have these days, and then the judge, as we talked about before, he has other obligations to other cases. He probably has 200 cases happening at any one time. This is the primary one, the only one he has trial on right now. But he's got other court duties to take care of. It's not just a matter of running through these witnesses. You're going to see it's been a pretty brisk pace for the last 2 weeks, I will say. You're going to see it slow dramatically.
I think that's right. Let's go to Stoner Mom. It says, he's a bad guy. He should have took the plea deal. Now, this is referencing that before the trial started, there were reports that the prosecutors made a plea deal to Diddy that his team looked at, his defense counsel advised him on, and he rejected. He didn't want it. My sense is that plea deal was not very friendly. I think the prosecutors think they have a very strong case. They're only going to offer him to mitigate their own risk of not getting a conviction. I think they feel pretty confident they can get a conviction on Diddy. So it's probably just too far apart. Diddy wants no time. They probably wanted a lot of time, and that's why we have a trial.
There's no way Diddy was insisting on no time. He knows he's going to have to serve time. I mean, the prosecutors would be raked across the coals it'd be a political fiasco if they gave him no time. He had to serve a number of years in prison, and he thinks his chances of winning are good enough. And
like any deal, they're just too far apart. They couldn't come to a meeting of the minds.
Right.
Stellar says, if Kid Cudi's car really blew up after Diddy said he would make it explode, how would they prove that?
Well, we're going to find out.
We're going to find out.
Kid Cudi tomorrow is going to be huge. I mean, pardon the pun, explosive testimony from Kid Cudi is coming. He's going to testify about what he knows about his car blowing up.
There's going to be hearsay objections across the board because he can say, my car blew up, and then they're going to say, okay, why do you attribute that to Diddy? Well, Cassie told me. Objection. Hearsay.
Right. But also, Diddy is not on trial for blowing up a car, so they don't have to close the loop that it was definitely Diddy. They have to just plant the seed in the jury's mind with enough evidence. I mean, if we have statements of Diddy that, he said specific things, those are going to be admissible. And so
I'm interested in the body language of Diddy towards Cudi, because this is a guy who we've heard testimony when Cassie started dating in 2011. He despised him so much. He wanted to hurt him, wanted to blow up his car. If you believe any of that, how's he going to respond to him when this guy walks in the courtroom? I think the jurors are going to be eagle-eyed looking at Diddy.
I can't wait.
Bezo Lego says, when does the defense get their moment to defend him?
All right, so the prosecution is going to complete their case in chief probably, I'm guessing, 3 to 4 weeks in. And you will hear, as you've heard on television before, the prosecution rests, at which point the defense will then have the opportunity to call their first witnesses. They will run through all of their litany of a dozen or 2 dozen witnesses over the course of the next few weeks. The prosecution will have an opportunity to call additional rebuttal witnesses. The defense will have an opportunity to potentially call rebuttal witnesses.
This is why it takes so much time.
This is why it takes so much time. The judge does keep a judge that keeps a tight lid on the courtroom. He's pretty good enforcing the time commitment, so he'll limit the rebuttal witnesses, but that's the way it's going to work. You got to wait for the prosecution to commit to finalize their case in chief, get all their evidence in. They will rest, and then the defense will call the first witness.
That's exactly right. And we'll end with a comment from Monkey Man. He said, been listening to this on my way to work each day on Spotify. Love the updates. Well, we're having a great time doing the podcast. It's very interesting to sort of delve into more details than we can do on the other shows. And
thanks for mentioning Spotify. We're available anywhere you get your podcast. Listen to the podcast. We love it when you do. Also on YouTube as well under, I think it's TMZ's Behind the Bar podcast.
That's exactly right. See you tomorrow.
Bye.